Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tarnished Bronze. This is my co-host Patrick, and today we are in for a real treat or a real terror, depending on your point of view. We have Uncanny X-Men issue 186, Life Death, a love story. Not a superhero outfit to be seen, I don't think, although superheroes will be appearing in this. Patrick shakes his head. Patrick, did you get this off the shelf?
I think you know the answer to this. I would have not picked this up off the shelf when I was a kid. You probably couldn't have given it to me. I probably would have removed the ads, stapled it back together. That's an inside joke. You have to be a long time listener to get that one. But no, absolutely not. No powers used, no superhero outfits. This corny cover with the weak lines. I'm just kidding. I'm really reading it and I'm overplaying it. But no, when I was a kid, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate this. This came out in 1984. I was 10 years old and definitely not my style. So even if I was trying to collect X-Men every month, which I'd like the X-Men by this time, I would have just skipped this one, which is weird because I'm also a completist. And I've also always been, I guess maybe a little OCD, but I would have been like, yeah, I don't need this. I don't need this
So it's
issue. I'm good.
double-sized garbage in your opinion. So yeah,
A
thanks
little bit.
everyone. This is the shortest tarnished bronze we've ever had.
We're
But in
good.
all seriousness,
Let me say I appreciate it now. I really did. On the reread, I was like, oh, okay. And I really got into it. So
I think most of your sort of discomfort with the story now is the fact of the characterization rather than the actual stuff which is in the issue. So some things have gone before this. So why don't we run down the creative list and then we can kind of get to grips with who's doing it because it is a little bit different. And then we can get into some of the backstory that exists before this issue hits the press. So this one's by Chris Claremont, who we've already gone through before. You've started reading the X-Men maybe 30 or so issues before this, Patrick. And then you're currently, or in this soon to be future, you'll be getting those classic X-Men's that'll catch you up. My first Chris Claremont episode is, I think, a 1999 issue of the Fantastic Four reboot after Heroes Reborn. So that shows a generational gap, although I did quickly fill in my X-Men collection once I started. However, we haven't really talked much about Barry Windsor Smith, who casts a long shadow over comics, and Terry Austin, who is inking him here. Usually he inks his own work and colors his own work. So this is Terry Austin keeping some of that John Byrne, Dave Cockrum continuity going on, but with this Barry Windsor Smith art, which is to me, I first identified Barry Windsor Smith as a Conan artist. He does Conan Rune in the 90s, but then I went back and got all these 70s back issues. He is the sort of canonical Conan artist. Were you aware of him at all, Patrick? I know you're aware of Terry Austin because you're a big Burn head.
yeah, but no, and when I was young, I really didn't pay attention to who the artists were. I would see things and know if they were familiar to me or not, but I really gave short shrift to the creators, writers, and artists. And so that's sort of a weakness on my side. When I was just too young, and comics were so difficult to get that I wasn't able to follow certain artists or certain authors. So it's a weak point for me. I do have a question for you. Barry Windsor Smith was not the normal penciler for the X-Men. This is sort of a fill-in in terms of artists. But who was who do you know who penciled 185? I think
Uh,
they had already moved on from Byrne, right? He was doing Fantastic Four.
It may be Paul Smith, no
Okay.
relation. Or it might have been the return of Dave Cockrum. Like I said, this is a little bit ahead of my reread. Long-time listeners will know that I'm rereading a lot of these old classics. I think I'm up to roughly the 150s, 160s. So I don't even have information of the immediate preceding storyline, Patrick. And this is one of the things that that is crucial to your initial reaction of this. So why don't you tell us what has gone on with Storm in
Uh,
this period?
well, just let me answer my own question because let me just give you a little background when I read this. So when I started reading this, there were a few things that weren't 100% making sense. So I actually got out the issue before, and it's actually sitting here, and it was John Romita Jr. And I actually knew that. I just forgot. He
Okay,
was the normal penciler. He was the person that for me was the main penciler on the X-Men for a majority of the time that I was really into them. So I just forgot that. So I apologize. But the reason that I picked out the previous issue was, we have this roller coaster story of a love affair that turns to hate, and there's so many emotions going on.
all the
And
feels.
yeah, and I started thinking, is this, do we know Forge? I mean, does he have a connection with the X-Men before? Does Storm know who he is even? Is he just some strange man that she's woken up in his penthouse? So I went back to the previous because I thought I knew, and I was correct that Forge had not had, as far as I know, any other interactions with the X-Men. In the previous issue, Storm has tracked down Rogue, and while she's talking to her, trying to convince her to come back to the team, there's a raid under the auspices of Peter Gyrich. Gyrich?
Yeah,
Is that
Gingrich or Gyrick, yeah.
he has a sort of a raid. They're trying to capture Rogue for various reasons. Obviously, she's a former member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She's done things that the government, wants her to answer for. And uh, Gyrich uses Forge's power neutralizer. He intends to shoot Rogue, but instead he shoots Storm, and Storm loses her powers. She falls into the river or whatever body of water they're battling around. And so he's taken Storm back to his penthouse to recover from her injuries, and she does not know that he is the person who has actually invented the weapon that's taken away her powers. So during the story, Forge sort of uses his experience of recovering from a very traumatic tour in Vietnam to help Aurora deal with the loss of her powers, which is obviously extremely traumatic for her because not only is that what makes her special and super and the leader of the X-Men, et cetera, et cetera. Was she? Oh, I guess she's not the leader yet. So a member of the X-Men, but also her powers are intrinsically involved with her emotions and her identity as a human being. So it's even maybe more than if another superhero had lost their powers. So the reason I was a little questioning is because I can't really figure out who Storm thinks Forge is when she initially discovers herself in his penthouse. She's been in the middle of Mississippi or Alabama or some no, I won't say godforsaken. I'm only kidding. I live in the South. Godforsaken Southern hellhole. And there's been a raid by the government. Her friend has escaped. She's been blasted out of the sky, and she wakes up in a penthouse. Does she not think that maybe this guy might be somehow connected to that? Or does she just think that he's some Southern gentleman that was strolling along the riverbank and happened to see her fall into the water? So I was a little confused by that, to be honest. And again, I don't want to be too critical, but I'm putting too fine a point on it. But it was kind of fun for me to be like, why? Who does she think he is? What do you think?
Well, that's good because, as I said in my reread, I haven't been introduced to Forge yet. Obviously, I know who he is down the pike. But yeah, he seems a relatively new character in the continuity. It seems like they were waiting for an excuse to have this issue, which I think probably took a little while to get off the ground because it's double length, it's highly detailed. Barry Windsor Smith is not necessarily the fastest guy in the West, but nonetheless, you do want him to draw these kind of stories. And I am unsure as to the kind of timeline of events, as you said, like how close is this to the event of Storm losing her powers? And it seems like it's incredibly recent, not only in her emotional state, but also in the actual continuity of the comic books. And so with that knowing, we do need to suspend a bit more disbelief than we would. So this
That's
is very
fair.
much a Love Boat Dynasty Days of Our Lives episode where people can be pregnant for, 3.5 years. And divorces can be prolonged over 4 years. Indeed, you can get remarried before you're even divorced. So you've just
Divorce,
got to treat
exactly.
this
And,
as
and
the
that's
soap
fair.
opera that it
I'm okay. I'm okay with that. But having said that, I think if you're in a position where I'm telling you you're moving too fast, you may be moving too fast. So
okay.
the emotions are flying, all the feels, as you said, hot and heavy. These two begin to fall in love very quickly, and it's even though there are reasons in the plot to maybe question a few things. It's well written, and it's interesting how he's trying to pull her through her emotions. He's falling in love with her as she sort of is regaining her will to live, and her reconciling the fact that her life will perhaps never be the same. She's also falling for him as well, until the screw turns.
Yeah, and
Are we ready
describing
for are we
yeah.
ready for the dip?
Yeah, describing this seems like describing the plot of Titanic, but leaving out the fact that they're on a boat headed for an iceberg. I mean, it is a very much an interior story. Aside from the B plot, which has more than enough action and chokeholds and car crashes and whatnot. So I mean, even though this is a little rest pause in the otherwise chaotic event of the X-Men, we do cover a fair amount of narrative ground and a lot of personal growth. So you can see here Forge is not your average person, and I like how in these otherwise naturalistic settings, the artist is able to convey with these little rectangular motifs that this is kind of like a flickering matrix screen. And it's so understated. We have seen it overstated by other artists. I think Warlock comes to mind. It kind of seems all a bit much. But here it's just sort of flickering in the background. And if you're not looking for it, you don't see it until the major reveal where Storm tries to kind of like get out of this physical area and also this relationship at the same time. Would you kind of agree, Patrick, that it's like a three-act play in this comic book, just with all of these emotions and these beautiful color choices and I think it's almost like a dance between Forge and Storm in these panels, and there's a lot of repartee. There's, like you said, Forge has had an unbelievable tragedy in his life that you and I can't really conceive of, and he's lost a limb and so on and so forth, and some friends, and Storm has lost like a big major part of her identity. Which is even more traumatic in many ways than a physical loss. So I think that the work here
They
really does that quite well. And I love this touch. So you can see on the fingers when it's pushed up against the glass how that's not colored. Just some really fantastic touches here. Why Forge is in his exercise cutoff outfit and Storm is going around in a ball gown escapes me. But I thought you would pick up on that, Patrick. But I'm like, just like, this is a very curious get up.
I actually did. That's funny. I feel like Forge really only has one outfit. He's very Cyclops coded, and he's all about the technology. I feel like he works all the time. But back to your point, yeah, they've been able to really bond over their traumatic experiences, and Forge trying to show Aurora the path through that trauma to the other side. Now, the problem is Forge has been forged, if you will, excuse the pun, by his traumatic past. So he's maybe not the most experienced person when it comes to showing care or shepherding someone through these rough times. So he makes missteps. Aurora's not really responsive at first. But it turns out, in my opinion, in rereading this, that the tough love actually eventually works for her, and he maybe is the right person to lead her to the other side, and to change her self-pity back into motivation to get back into the real world. Now, the problem happens, as you saw on the next screen, where she is sitting in the room with Forge, who says he has to take this phone call. So he walks out of the room, and while she's sitting there, she immediately thinks, "Oh, you know what? I should call my friends. They probably think I'm dead." I mean, maybe you would have thought of that when you woke up in a stranger's bed. I don't know. Again, I'm okay with suspending, my disbelief, but my disbelief is creeping in a little bit. And then she's been out of Kenya for a long time, but she seems to forget how phones work in a house. So she goes to use the phone, and she realizes, oh, he actually was leaving the room to take this phone call that he was just on in front of me. So now I'm overhearing his call. So she gets mad because of what she heard, but should he be mad for her sort of invading his privacy a little bit? Or I don't
So
know.
for all of the generation millennial and Zoomers out there, this is a landline phone, so that had to get plugged into the wall. And you could pick it
Hey, let me
up.
explain something to you.
Yeah.
This is how old I am. When I was growing up, not only did your landline connect to the other phones in your house, it connected to the phones of the people on the street that you lived on. So you could pick up the phone to make a phone call, and your neighbor two houses down could be on the phone having, it was called a party line. Look that one up, kids. Now, there are some people, probably the only people listening to these old comics are our age, so they may know that, but kids today have no idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the demographics of who wants to go out and rush to buy Uncanny X-Men 186 after we're talking about it. But I'd be
That's fair.
interested. Write a comment if you find this issue out there in the wild. Um, and you're right, Patrick. There's this intimate moment and the illusions are shattered once she realizes that this person is responsible. And I think Forge is trying to rehabilitate her because he feels responsible. I think he also is in many ways responsible in a tangential way. So I think part of this is like if I make a weapon, this is a very philosophical episode or issue of the X-Men. If I make this ultimate weapon and someone is harmed by it, is that my bad, or did those people make the wrong choice with the Prometheus argument? I gave you fire, and what did you end up doing with it? Well, if you take that ad infinitum, we get to nuclear weapons, right? So there's a lot going on in this episode. We've had some episodes of Tarnished Bronze where someone has just finished their college courses and have decided to pack all of that in a very overwrought manner. Here it's undersold. Here, the window dressing of the all of this is this interpersonal relationship. So I feel like the pacing is really good and the relationship reaches a natural denouement as opposed to a forced one. And this is, of course, the major A plot here. This is getting Storm angry. It's getting powerless Storm running around in the rain again. Now, did that rain just happen, or did that rain kind of was that caused by something? And this is something that both of these characters are going to be dancing with in and out as the X-Men goes on. And this is still, as I think, a touchstone for Storm's character even now. I think in canon, she still remembers losing her losing her powers. So I think that this sort of epoch of the X-Men, this John Romita Jr. post John Byrne kind of period is where a lot of the interpersonal relationships are laid down more firmly. He's not juggling it so much. It's kind of settled. And a lot of the springboard of what he wants to do in the future is kind of started this wider world of mutants. So this Forge guy working with Gingrich and so on, that's going to come down and bite everyone in the ass pretty soon. I don't know if this is before or after God Loves, Man Kills, but these issues, these big, heavy-hitting issues, have been sprinkled in the X-Men, and they're all coming home to roost, to roost now. So divorcing ourselves from the previous issues is not something that we really can do. But nonetheless, Patrick, you would say at the end of this issue, Storm has a relationship with Forge, but it is very rocky. This is something that she's going to have a lot of time spent to recover from. But nonetheless, we get her to where we need her to be, ready to settle some scores, right? Is that what you think Claremont went for here? He needs to get Storm somewhere where she's in this emotional space. And I think that works regardless of the sort of square pegs in round holes that we had to do to maybe get to that position. Would you say that that's something that you agree with, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, he could have nursed her back. Let's say that she was found, by Charles Xavier, right, or her teammates, and they had nursed her back to health, and maybe she's morose, and there would have to be some other catalyst for her to get her strength back, right, her backbone. So instead of that, we have her sort of falling in love and maybe starting to regain her strength in a flowering way, and then it's all ripped out from under her, and she sort of goes back to being the Hellcat that she's already become. Before, she's already been transformed from the Kenyan weather goddess to what I at the time saw as a Callisto knockoff.
Mhm.
I have to say, I really like the character of Storm, but I had a difficult relationship with her when I was reading the X-Men at the time. As you know, I love characters who have powers. I think the original Storm was just beautifully designed. I loved the outfit. I loved the hair. I loved everything about her. And for me, they just slowly whittled her away. First, she loses her connection with the Earth. I think that was later retconned because they were in space for so long.
Yeah, yeah,
She
you're right.
looks like a Morlock. She dresses like a punk. She has this mohawk that in this panel looks a little pitiful, I have to say, kind of like a wet hen. And then they take away her powers, and just the one blow after another. I feel sympathy for the character, but I also lost a bit of interest in the character because then at that point she just becomes a street fighter, and it wasn't what I was interested in when I was that age. So because of that, when I was rereading this, I remembered heartily my complete disdain for Forge. Just was like, yeah, absolutely destroy him. Like he's terrible. But when I read it as an adult and trying to be open-minded and really read into the nuance, I wondered, and I have this question for you, is Storm being a little bit hypocritical when she says that he's hollow, form without substance, and someone who believes in nothing because he's created a weapon that presumably, if he's a nice guy, is going to be used against people like Magneto who are killing people, right? She has fought countless evil mutants. I mean, she's on a team whose modus operandi is to protect the world from evil mutants and show the world that there are good mutants. So his weapon, yes, was used improperly by someone who shouldn't have been using it against someone he shouldn't have used it against. But is she not also just sort of in the same position that Forge is, where she's fighting mutants as well?
Yeah, I think that this episode gets us a little bit into that sort of governmental conspiracy, the anti-mutant sentiment stuff that's getting stirred up by some nefarious operators within, obviously not the real government, the government in the comic books. And and it's sort of a little bit like the X-Files. So there's some people who were trying to like help the X-Men, and then the sort of overlapping people are trying to essentially make the Sentinels the default stance on mutants in society. And so I think Storm is sort of being a little bit naive.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you
I
know,
she's upset.
yeah.
She's
Oh,
upset.
yeah.
And he's been completely duplicitous. I mean, when she wakes up, he should probably say, "Yeah, you know, you got shot by this gun. I created it. You've lost your powers. You know, maybe I can figure out a way to create another gun that I can shoot you with so you get your powers back." You know, I mean, that's not really he buried the lead a bit. So I understand her being upset, but in the end, when he's trying to explain himself, maybe her reactions are a little unfair
Yeah, but
in
you
some
know,
ways.
you and I have we've never had enough power to be depowered. So
Exactly.
I guess it's a moot point. But the emotion conveyed is really conveyed visually, and what they're speaking of, they're not speaking their emotions, they're speaking their thoughts. And I think that is the key to Barry Windsor Smith here. The emotion is all in the art. The thoughts and these issues are conveyed in the speech bubbles, and there's very little thought bubbles. It's a really good, well-crafted issue that I can just go to again and again and again. I just love this story. I love it more in isolation than in its context, because of those reasons that you raised. Like it is a little bit silly if we look at it in the as being issue 186 of a, you know, 800 issue saga. But if we just look at it as a comic book relationship, it does have those ups and those downs. And then because that other stuff is in my future with short-haired Rogue, which I must admit I don't really like the look of that much, but is what's going on in the B plot? I think that pays off big time down the road, right? Is Rogue a member of the X-Men yet or not?
She is a member of the X-Men. I think there may be still a bit of lingering distrust among certain members, but for the most part, um, if if I recall correctly, they really resolved that pretty quickly in the ongoing storyline. So maybe a couple of issues in, you know, Rogue does whatever she does that kind of proves herself to the team. So in the B plot here, Rogue, who also has been in hiding, right? The government was after her. You know, they're both dealing with the fallout of this raid that has happened, and she's gone deep undercover in order to find Storm. She's worried about getting caught herself, but her main focus is how do I find Storm? And the way that she knows best how to do that is to try to find Valerie Cooper. And here we can see that she's found her. Now, meanwhile, Xavier and Nightcrawler are looking for Storm and not able to find her, but because she has no powers, so Cerebro cannot find her, but they are able to find Rogue. And so
Okay.
we know going forward that the X-Men are now aware that Rogue is still okay, and Rogue is on the path of trying to find Storm. And Storm has fled the penthouse. She's finished with Forge. And where is she going to go? Does she need some time alone, or is she going to go back to the safety of the mansion? To be honest, I don't remember. I didn't pull out the next issue. I only pulled out the one before. So
Well,
your guess is as good as mine.
I think some of these subsequent issues will be highlighted, and some of the preceding issues will be highlighted. I mean, we're not going to do this like we will the interstitial Avengers of the between the big runs, but we will just pick out issues of Uncanny X-Men that, for one reason or another, really tickle our boat. And I just thought I'd show off some more artwork. I really love this. And this is rubbing salt in Patrick's wound. Like here's the full force of Storm in the classic
Yeah.
high cut bikini outfit. Um, I actually quite like powered punk Storm. So I like the punk haircut, but in the old, the old costume. So, but with the real mane, not with the half-assed one that's kind of on show in those last few panels of this issue. So I
Oh
got,
yeah, you mean the full mohawk, right?
yeah, yeah, that,
I agree with that. When she's punk, if she has the full head of hair mohawk, I'm better. I'm a little better with it.
yeah.
But I
So
do
she's
miss the
got the
Earth
John
Goddess. I
Romita
mean,
Jr. do that makes it a bit better. And I just love this set of panels. Like I could just look at this all day. I love the water. I like the design. It just makes me feel happy that someone can draw this good. And it's a very touching moment actually
I'd
here
say
because this is the swimming race bit, right? Where he asks her to catch him in the water. And
reveals
yeah, kind of really, there's a lot
he
of,
reveals his disability.
yeah, there's a lot of nuance in this. And I think reading it, if I had read this at 10, I don't think I would have had much time for this either, Patrick. But nonetheless, I very much enjoy it as an adult and a fan of Barry Windsor Smith. I could see him do every second issue of X-Men as the Days of Our Lives soap opera, and I'd be a very happy man.
Can we go back one slide? I think it's a great panel, but maybe a bit too much splash. So I'm thinking maybe an 8.5 from the East German judge on that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We'd have to.
I'm
It's
kidding.
it's clumsy, but maybe it's clumsy because she hasn't got all of her nature powers yet.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
No,
it's
no,
just
no. It's a great dive.
it's it's
I'm
it's
completely kidding.
it's just too clever for you. You don't understand what's trying to be parceled out into this. So a few little end things here, Patrick. So this is 1983, right? This issue comes out.
84.
84. So I looked at some of the advertisements because
84.
I've got one here, and those original 5-year-old X-Men's are already $9 or $10. And these are at discount bulk
Wow.
sales dealers. And so that is about 15 times cover price of what they would have been, which is astonishing in less than 5 years. So this must just really be going gangbusters. So we've done a few episodes on the X-Men. One of them, it was just coming out of being reprints. And then even when we're on the Byrne, Cockrum, Claremont train, it's still only coming out 6 times a year. So in the space of 5 years, it's gone from you can't give this away to back issues being $9, $10, and back issues that are less than 4 years old in real time. And so I can imagine, Patrick, as a youngster, classic X-Men would have been a godsend to you because you can get your hands on that without going to a big comic dealer or a shop which might not exist where you live.
Yeah, well, yeah, there were no comic book shops, and there was one sort of near where my grandmother lived, and she used to take me sometimes. This is actually a really one of my favorite childhood memories, but I didn't discover that, and I don't even know how I discovered it until probably right before I got my driver's license. That's when I started getting some of these X-Men issues from around this time. Life Death may have been one that I skipped at the comic book shop and didn't bother to fill in because I also didn't have a lot of money at that time. Even though they're relatively affordable, even compared to maybe today's standards, um, you still only got the ones that you really needed for the stories that you really liked. So yeah, I don't know why looking back, I never did a mail subscription, but it
It
never
seems
occurred
a
to me.
great deal. 12
I
bucks.
don't know.
Send me.
Honestly,
Yeah.
it's something I've questioned so many times in my life. I don't know if maybe I asked my parents and they didn't let me, or maybe it was because I was so particular about, oh, I don't want to read this comic because it's not got villains and it's about this hokey love story. My thoughts at the time, not my thoughts now. That maybe I didn't want to get the same the same comic month after month. I maybe didn't have the proper appreciation for it. But looking back, I wish I'd done something like that. So
So yeah, this just so Love and Rockets is a thing right now. So comics are becoming big in both Marvel and DC. This is still pre-crisis, but independent comics are moving and they're covering this sort of subject matter along with their own sort of more adult violence as well. But I think Chris Claremont and the people at Uncanny X-Men, they had their finger on the pulse somehow to smuggle this into a mainstream sort of comic book. In hindsight, it's just astonishing that you could have a double-sized issue of a powerless character, a disabled character, a somewhat villain, actually, and not have it be like Doctor Doom and Sue Storm as some sort of farcical brainwashing
mm.
experience. I think we should treasure these things, and that's what Tarnished Bronze is about. Is about finding these things that maybe they're not our personal favorite, but nonetheless, like show these off a little bit because they some of these issues that we kind of find are a little bit peculiar. And like them or
Yeah, and
love
this
them,
is this is to reiterate what you. Oh, sorry. Just to
yeah, and
reiterate what you said, this is a complete departure from the main storyline that's been going on, right? The X-Men is not known at this time for double issues of, relationship talk. So it actually is quite remarkable.
yeah, it's bizarre in a very good way. I'm pleased that this exists. And of all the people to draw this, a guy known for drawing shirtless men with massive swords, and that is not a euphemism, um, would not necessarily be my first pick to draw this, but it really does work. So there's some editorial, some talent spotter, or someone, Barry Windsor Smith, put his hand up to do this. And I think he put a lot into it. There's a lot of craft in this. To me, it's a mini
Is his style
masterpiece.
in
I love it.
Conan,
Hey,
is his style in Conan similar to this? I'm not familiar with Conan at all.
um, well, the material is very different, but his style is similar, although it's a bit bolder, because the
Okay,
reproduction,
I
I
wondered.
think,
That's what I wondered.
on those 70s comics is not quite as good. But yeah, hyper detailed backgrounds too. You know, he loves the background, and you can tell here. I don't know how you can draw transparent stuff so good without using the digital effects that are available now, and it kind of comes off it's very astonishing. And so yeah, like I said, for me this is a mini masterpiece, and for Patrick it's begrudgingly good.
I appreciate it a lot more now than yeah, definitely than I would have when I was a kid.
Well, thanks everyone for indulging us in this trip down Tarnished Bronze memory lane. Hopefully, you can find some other Barry Windsor Smith issues out there. I know that he's got quite a following, and there is some new material from Barry Windsor Smith out relatively recently. So, I'd just like to thank my co-host Patrick, and we will see you in the comments. Like, follow, and subscribe. And we are Tarnished Bronze.